his manager said when he stepped inside his apartment. Jungkook responded and threw the clothes on the floor, letting them scatter everywhere. Jungkook interrupted his manager. His manager sighed in expressions. Jungkook snapped at his manager. He needed to calm before doing anything. He could never let himself lose control. This would only cause more problems and possibly harm to other workers. He sighed and sat down on the couch. His manager rolled his eyes. Jungkook simply replied. Vian was sitting in her office, working on her latest project. She was currently designing a dress for a client. She wanted to show that her design would be perfect enough for her client's requirements. After finishing that dress, she turned to another one that was already done. Thinking to herself about what she could improve it, she was busy thinking until her phone rang. She answered and put the phone to her ear, listening to the caller. Jungkook sat through the phone. She answered, trying to sound surprised. Jungkook asked without hesitation. Vian wondered and bit her bottom lip. Jungkook sat and Vian was taken aback at what he had just said. Jungkook didn't know why he felt nervous about it. Maybe because it was his first time having an honest conversation with someone about feeling and stuff. Vian asked while checking the time on her phone. Jungkook simply sat and hung up. Vian thought to herself and got up from her chair. Vian grabbed her bag and left the office while humming a song. Jungkook sat down on his living room couch, his hand crossed behind his neck and a frown on his face. He couldn't help but feel uneasy. What was he supposed to say when she came? What should they even talk about? Was he even ready to tell her about how he feels about her? He said out loud in order to comfort himself, but it didn't make much sense. Jungkook wondered as he came back to his senses. He stood up and walked towards the kitchen. Jungkook mumbled to himself as he prepared himself a cup of coffee. Vian arrived at Jungkook's flat 10 minutes later and knocked on the door softly. She waited patiently for someone to answer. The door finally opened, revealing Jungkook's manager, who gave her a weird look. He asked while blocking the door with his body to prevent her from entering the flat. She looked at the clock on his wall. She raised her eyebrows in shock. The manager explained, which made Vian nod. Vian sat and laughed while wondering. Vian told herself as she continued walking towards the elevator. Meanwhile, in the living room, Jungkook was waiting for her desperately. Soon his manager entered with 2 cups of coffee and a contract file. Jungkook just glared at him, making him sigh in defeat. Jungkook argued while opening the contract. His manager rolled his eyes. He reminded him as he took his seat at his desk. Jungkook ignored him, reading the contract instead signing after a few minutes. He questioned, looking up at his manager. Jungkook nodded his head and sighed. Vine smiled, sitting on the cold sand while staring at the moon. She slowly sipped on her strawberry flavored smoothie as she enjoyed the night sky. The air was crisp around her and the breeze blew gently. Making her hair move, there was a slight breeze in front of her, making her look up at the sky. She then heard footsteps coming towards her direction and noticed Jungkook standing by her side. He shrugged his shoulder and kept his distance. She sat and looked at the moon. She muttered. Jungkook asked, making her look up at him. He said, looking at her, smiling softly and making her face warm up immediately. She shuddered and looked away. Jungkook hummed, nodding his head in agreement. Silence engulfed the area once again as they both remained looking up the moon. Jungkook began breaking the silence. Ryan looked at him and chuckled lightly. Jungkook asked, making her laugh quietly. Jungkook pondered on her words, making her smile. They fell silent once again, but this time it wasn't tense silence. It was just a silence filled with content. Ryan broke the silence and turned to look at Jungkook. She asked curiously, making him think for a second. He then shook his head in response. Ryan chuckled. He was stunned. No one ever asked him about his happiness. He finally responded. He answered confidently. Ryan looked up at him curiously, with a smile on her face. She simply stated as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Jungkook looked at her shocked. He looked down at her smiling face and smiled. He whispered, making Ryan smile widen.